Lost another cat. All is well with the world. Oscar's back. Welcome to another Modular Monday. I have two phobias, and they say when you have phobias you should confront them, confront your fears. The first is aerophobia, so I moved 500 miles away from my place of work and now have to get 150 flights a year on average down to London. How I confronted my fear? Well, not really, I just drink my way through it. My second phobia is jam sessions. If I'm at a party and someone brings out a djembe, I'm out of there. So I thought I'd confront this fear by inviting up 3 friends to Edinburgh to have a jam session. Those of you who follow the Spitfire channels may recognise these young, talented composers, Oliver, Homai, and the latest addition to our composition team, Louis. As I say, they make up the composition team at Spitfire Audio with the addition of my business partner, Paul Thompson. Let's head down to the shed. You'll probably notice that I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not my usual bubbly self. I'm a little bit there's a spider in the room and I've got arachnophobia, that kind of thing. But anyway, down to the shed. So, I just thought we could just put some stuff together, have a bit of a jam. I've got one idea, and it's kind of atonal. Basically, I don't know if you're aware that I'm not using the computer, so everything goes into here. But I currently only have 8 tracks, so 4 stereo tracks. My hope was to use the Modular as a kind of beat, bass and ostinato maker, and then to use maybe both the piano and the Wurlitzer, one as a kind of the lead thing, and then maybe some vintage synths. And the idea I had is like really super simple. It's almost like a minimalist idea. I feel that the home key is A, but it's not that obvious, so it's like an E pedal. So I wondered whether this actually would work better on the Wurlitzer with the possibility of using this as the bass, because it's super fat. But then what I thought, so if I'm operating the Modular, whoever's doing the bass, I'll copy what you do on the bass and basically have a really big bass oscillator that will copy that will all be sequenced. And there's just lots of toys over here to pick from. What I reckon might be quite fun is if we route the piano into the Modular, and then the Modular will have the kind of music output, and then it'll have drums. Okay. So that's 4 of our 8 tracks. And then the Wurlitzer on its own track, and vintage synth on its own track. And I reckon we could set some pedals up there for the Whirly, and possibly, because the vintage things, you forget how kind of actually they sound a bit shit. So we could put them through Big Skies and all of that kind of stuff. So,
whoa. Sorry, Louis, could you? I think I might really good at figure out where the power's going, just so we can.
Good enough for jazz. We're in a mindset of triggering things, but that's not how Modular works. It's opening and shutting.
Okay.
So it's just 2 things that you can, there's only 2 things that can happen, is on, or 3 things, on, off, and a mount. Okay. So it's control voltage, either is on or it's off, and then it's the amount. So that goes into a VCA, an ADSR, and then the ADSR controls the VCA out. Oh, I like that. So we've got to think of a way of controlling the pitch of that. And what would be quite fun is maybe just not control it with a keyboard, control it from something like this.
Does it have an internal clock then?
This is a sequencer, yeah. Okay, so we've still got that. And then we're going to control the pitch of that oscillator. So the different notes I thought were cool were A, the root. So if we just use those 4, God, we are just totally playing, aren't we? This is so
Really
funny.
having a jam here.
It's just playing.
Should we come out of the PA of the monitors? Christian, instantly.
Is already a
Yeah, it's all set up. So it may be the top ones.
Okay. Here we are.
Oh, that sounds amazing already.
I haven't really done anything. This sounds cool, this pedal.
How are we doing?
so that
Yeah, good.
I'm going to take my headphones in a bit and pay attention. I'm just lost in a world of madness.
Where is the synth going, Christian?
So,
Where's the synth and the bass going?
okay, so the bass. How are we going to do this? Can I just finish this wiring thoughts in my head before I get lost, and then I'll have a think about that.
I think we got 4 on the Modular.
And then I've got this other thing. And I'll just take a bit of bottom F on off.
That's like your main mixer, this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty cool.
You see, and that's the thing that when people are watching people perform, they're opening and shutting things really.
Sorry.
Well, what I was going to do is either follow maybe your left hand, or if you were going to use the Fender up there. Oh my.
Yeah, maybe I can start taking over the top B or something
Yeah.
like that. So you have a reverby, spacious...
Yeah. Okay. So could I make you tape op as well? It's good old-fashioned record and play. And if you could just note we're on take 16 at the moment. Okay. Right. A little slurp of coffee. Sandy came up with a great idea. This is an unusual place to unbox something. And that was, we're looking at the kind of collaborative nature of Spitfire Audio, but also the collaborative nature of Piano Book. How could we make Modular Mondays more collaborative? And he had a good idea, and that was, why don't we buy the same kit and see how differently we use those bits of kit? The dynamic between Sandy and myself is, I don't know what I'm doing with Modular, and Sandy does. I also trust his judgment where buying kit is concerned. So I've got these two things that I need to put into my Modular rig, but I'm actually going to cheat. I'm not going to. I'm going to wait for Sandy to get a head start on me, because I know that he's going to make a video and explain how these things work, so I don't have to RTFM. Right, over to Sandy.
Hi Christian. So this week I thought I'd just take a quick look at the 2 new modules that we're going to both be using. That is Mutable Instruments Plaits and ALM Busy Circuits Pamela's new workout. I'm going to start with Plaits. I might be using Pamela's new workout a little bit here, but whilst I'm explaining Plaits, you can basically ignore this. So Plaits is essentially an updated version of Braids, Braids being the macro oscillator. And it's really quite simple to use, but incredibly powerful. You can get a great deal of different sounds out of it. It's best to start looking in the middle here. We have a row of LEDs here with little icons on the left in green and little icons on the right in red. And these are the different algorithms, or the different sort of sound sources that you can use. So if I plug this in and turn it up, I've just got this hooked up into my VCA, and I'm using the Analog 4 sort of as an audio interface essentially. So I'm going to bring this volume up. Then what we're hearing right now is the first of these algorithms. I'm not going to go into what each of these algorithms is, because these are covered in the manual, but basically all the green ones are your melodic and harmonic material. So you've got some great sort of FM sounds. Including some wavetable stuff, which is great. And chords. And vocal sounding synthesizer. And then on the right hand side, we have all of our noise and percussive sources. These aren't going to sound quite as good with just the raw oscillator like I'm listening to right now. But these are all of the sources that we could use for generating noise, for percussive hits, kick drums. But it also has that great modeling synth that's used for inharmonic string resonator from Elements and Rings. But the thing that makes Plaits really especially interesting is instead of just being like an oscillator, like this, which you might use in place of something like another VCO, it also has a built-in VCA and VCF in what's called a low-pass gate. So if I send a gate or trigger into the trig input here, we now have basically a full little voice here with its own amplitude envelope and its own filter envelope. So let's jump onto one of these sounds and we'll just send it a slightly faster triggers. So for each of the different algorithms on Plaits, we have a frequency and harmonic control, which generally affect the tuning, the frequency being your sort of volts per octave, the kind of root pitch. And the harmonics, this will change depending on the algorithm. So for FM, this might be the second oscillator or the second operator. For this particular sound, it's more like a kind of notch filter that's moving around. When you're using the chord mode, this is the chord voicing. And then for some of the more esoteric controls, this might be a wavetable position or something like that. Besides these two controls, we also have timbre and morph. And again, these are both controls that will quite dramatically change the overall timbre of the sound. And like a lot of the mutable instrument stuff, all of these are CV controllable. So we have volts per octave here will control our frequency. This harmonic input here will control our harmonics knob. And then we also have, for timbre and morph, it's a little bit more interesting because we have inputs for them that have these little attenuverter knobs. So let me just hook something up. So I've hooked up an oscillating sine wave CV input into the timbre here, and what I can do is slowly increase this, and that's almost like an amount control for this input. So with this set all the way to the right, that sine wave CV that I'm sending is doing a full sweep of the control. And I can have it just above 0, so it's barely doing anything, it's just tickling that control. And I can make it go the other way, so it's inverting that signal and pulling away from the control as well. With nothing connected to this input, these little attenuverters just normal to the envelope that you have, that little VCA. So let's hear what that sounds like on the timbre and the morph controls. We also have an FM control in the middle here, so we'll listen to what that sounds like. And again, that has a CV input if you want as well. So as you can hear, you've got quite a variety of different timbral capabilities there, and that's just with the first of the algorithms. So I'm going to come back to this in just a second. We'll jump over and have a quick look at what Pamela's new workout is, very briefly, and then we'll look at how we might combine the two for some interesting results. So Pamela's new workout is a clocked CV source. And what does that mean? It means you have a BPM control here for your tempo, which can be clocked using the inputs at the top here. And it can be stopped and started with this big yellow button here, or with this run input if that receives a trigger. And when it's running, each of these 8 outputs at the bottom is spitting out a clocked CV source. So at the moment, these are all just sending out a pulse wave, which is basically like a gate opening and closing. And you can see that they're all synced to exactly the same rate. Now you can use this like a simple clock divider, like the tempi for instance. So if I was to take 2 here and click on this, I can increase the rate so that this is now going at a different rate, but from the same clock. And I can also divide that so that it's running slower. And you can see how if you were to set these to different values, you could use these for generating a beat quite easily with just the gates. Now the gates are interesting enough on their own, but what's really cool is if I choose one of these, let's say for instance, we have this output 1, I can hold down on this and I can change the wave that this is outputting from a gate to a triangle wave so that it's pulsing, or a sine wave, or even an envelope, which can be really handy for doing little sort of low-pass gate triggering stuff like we heard on Plaits a minute ago. It can also do sample and hold random output, which is really useful. And it has some other wave tables there as well. So as well as controls over the actual wave that this is outputting, we have control over the level of that wave, whether it's 100%, whether it's going from 0 to the full value, or whether it's going from 0 to like 10% of the full value. We also have controls for offset and width and phase, which will all move that waveform sort of ahead and before the beat, and choose the pulse width of it, and so on and so forth. Those are all really useful, especially for sort of continuous modulation like this. But when we're using a gate like this, some of the really fun controls is we can put in a percentage chance for how often this is going to be skipped. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to hook it back up so that the Pamela's new workout output 1 is going to trigger our Plaits. So I'm just going to quickly hook up Plaits to the output so we can get some audio from that. And then take output 1 here and set that into the trig of Plaits. So far, so straightforward. Let's make it a bit quicker so we can hear this effect a bit more clearly. I'm going to go into skip and turn that percentage up to maybe 50%. And now it will randomly decide whether it's going to skip that step. And about half of the time at this current setting, you're going to hear it. But that's completely random. Another way that we can make this more rhythmically interesting in a more controlled way, if I set our skip to 0 again, we also have our what's called E-step, E-trig, and E-rot, or E-rotation, and these are all controls for Euclidean rhythms. So we can choose how long and how many steps we want our pattern to be, and E-trig decides how many onsets we want to have within that pattern. So I could say I want it to sound 15 times out of 24, for instance. And then I can also use the rotation here to rotate the steps, just to get things to sync up nicer with other material that we might have. And we can also choose whether we want this pattern to loop within a certain number of beats. And how this control here is how humanized this is, or how sloppy the timing is.
I'll stop you there if you don't mind, Sandy, because I do want to catch up with you next week and see what we both come up with. The Pamela's workout thing looks awesome. Thanks for explaining it to me. Right, back to the shed for the jam session. How did it go? I'm speaking to you after the event. We got it right in about the 3rd take. We did another 2 takes, but the 3rd was the one that had the most kind of vibe. I've learned a lot from the experience. It wasn't as bad and as awful as I remember jam sessions to be, probably because I'm actually jamming with people who are very talented. I feel that something I really need to kind of nail with this modular system is how to create a part B. You'll see this gets quite repetitive, and if I'm going to make an album of this stuff, I really do need to give it a bit of kind of dynamism and contrast. So that's going to be something I'm going to be thinking about over the next forthcoming weeks. You finished there, Oscar? Out of the way, mate. Come on. Thanks, mate. And the other lesson I learned is probably next time I do a jam session, something like that, I'd have us facing each other, not with our backs to each other. Anyway, enjoy. It reminds me of there was a saxophonist in Notting Hill Tube, and he only knew take 5, and he can only play it in 4/4.
That is really unsatisfying as well.
It's really not
It's like
very-
the whole thing about it is that it's in 5/4.
Okay.
Sorry.
Taking me back to the day.